Prime Minister of Britain. I mean, the man is an intellectual absurdity. He is an anti-intellectual. He spouts and pretends and seems to be quite clever and learned, but if you scratch beneath the surface, you get nothing. It's a cardboard cutout. I think he's also quite dangerous. His friends include Steve Bannon, who I regard as, intellectually challenged when it comes to morality. This is a nationalist. He stopped at a certain phase. Mazzini, the great Italian liberator, said, nationalism is only a stopping place on the road to humanity. You don't stop at nationalism, because nations come and go throughout history. They're like waves on the sea of time. There was one time Mongolia was the greatest nation in the world. Now it's just a little landlocked place of yurts and horsemen, and that's great. Nations come and go, right? So there was a time in the US when there were the nations of the Sioux, the nations of the Hopi and so on. But now they've been swept away and accommodated within something else. And the UK, a nation, is in danger of rumbling apart. And the Scottish nation wants to be reborn, and quite right too. And by the way, to all my friends in Scotland, hello, today is the anniversary of the Battle of Bannockburn, June the 23rd. It was the day on which they showed the Anglo-Norman adventurers who hijacked, the English state, that there were limits to their rapacity and cruelty, and they'd already killed William Wallace horrendously, and here Robert the Bruce finally stood up against them, and through some clever tactics, which might have been helped by Templars, he managed to defeat them today on this day at Bannockburn. So I think the Scots are brave and ethical people who realise the UK, if it was captured by Boris Johnson, it's been captured by the Tory party for far too long, in my opinion. I've always said the Tory party is looking more and more like an illegal sect, a dangerous sect, and people are now saying it's a kind of religious cult, Brexit, of a sort of death wish. It's like a narcissistic death wish thing. Cult leaders like their followers to commit suicide. What the Brexit cult leaders are doing, and Boris Johnson is one of their masters, is he wants the collective suicide of the British nation. The Scots aren't going to join that. They're off. They're leaving the Union, if that's really what these people are allowed to get away with. He also tends to, annoy and beat up his girlfriend, apparently, and be rude to her. And he sounds like a really horrendous man on a personal and a political level. So I think the Tories should just jettison him. He should never, ever be in the running for Tory leader. And any Conservative with any kind of degree of functioning brain should not vote for Boris Johnson as leader. The only way out of the problem is to have a second referendum, and I would like a general election on the same day. I think the current Commons doesn't reflect the true, nature of the British electorate, and a second referendum and a general election will clear the decks so that we get a totally new parliament to enact whatever the people say. And I strongly believe it now would be to remain. Well, that new government, which I would like to be a national coalition of Greens, Liberal Democrats, and the Labour Party, I'd like to see a strong Remain coalition stand at the next general election to oppose Brexit, because it is an idiocy and a monstrosity, and it's destroying the United Kingdom. So people throughout the land, Liberal Democrats are leading that fight, should be campaigning for Remain, loud and clear, working hand in hand with the Greens and with those Labour Party members that are intelligent enough, and it's the vast majority of Labour Party members, who realise that, no, this is also our fight. We were sold a series of lies over Brexit, and it's time to stand up and oppose them. I mean, I'm someone that used to belong to the Labour Party. I did part of my degree at the LSE. I've sat in the chair that George Bernard Shaw used to sit in the common room at the LSE when he was helping with the Fabians, and the Fabian Society set up the LSE, where many people have studied in the past. My daughters used to go to the nursery there. So I lament that real Labour Party, which used to know the difference between right and wrong, and when it spotted something, it called it out and did it. We need some people in the Labour Party now to seriously inject Jeremy Corbyn with the truth drug, because he's just been equivocating too long, and if he's afraid of right-wing voters, well, hey man, you're the Labour Party leader. Of course you're afraid of the right wing, but you've got to oppose it, not go along with it because you're afraid of them. And if you're just actually a disaster socialist who hates the European Union just with your gut, and you just want us all to go back to living on little allotments as Britain burns, then I'm afraid you shouldn't be leader of the Labour Party, because that means becoming Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, which means keeping the United Kingdom together. That's your first job. So anyway, Boris Johnson, the man's a joke. He should be, stuck in a zoo and people will come and watch him misbehave. There's a moral chaos going on in the UK, a moral emptiness, and I think we need to reflect very carefully on this day of Bannockburn, that we have to find the formula that works for Scotland as well as England and Wales and Northern Ireland, and that can only be a second referendum and ultimately remain. So, thank you. Also, a reminder, we're having the World Intellectual Forum conference in Europe here in September at a beautiful little place called Lindau, which is like a little lake town in Lake Constance. It's at the confluence of Austria, Germany and Switzerland in the Alp region. And I've been there before, and it's a most exquisite place to visit. There's a wonderful, world-famous Peace Museum there, which is twin to my European Peace Museum here. Theirs has been going longer, obviously. And so we're going to be meeting there to discuss all these issues and more, and how we can, energize the thinking people of the planet to make a stand for peace. How are we going to get enough people campaigning to cut the world's military budgets by 95%? Come and join us in either through social media or in person in Lindau in September. And before that, coincidentally, in August, there's going to be the World Conference on Religion and Peace, or Religions for Peace meeting, in the same town. Both events are booked totally without knowing about the other one. And I was Secretary General of the World Conference on Religion and Peace for nearly 10 years for Britain and Ireland, and I met many interfaith leaders. It inspired me to do the work I'm doing in many respects. Inspired the setting up of the multi-faith mediation service, which I've written to Trump and the Iranian president about. So I'm really happy they're meeting in Germany. I'd love to go. If I can get there, I will. That's in August. Okay, so I want to comment on something else. I noticed Mark Rylance, the actor, has resigned from the Royal Shakespeare Company over BP sponsorship and the state of the world's environment. I think this is a right move, and I think Mark Rylance is a great man. I respect his work as an actor, as a thinker of theatre, and he rightly said, look, if Shakespeare is alive today, he wouldn't want to be sponsored by people that are destroying the planet. And I'm a great lover of Shakespeare. I used to be a Shakespearean actor of my own, and I've written plays that in the Shakespearean mould, and some of my poetry is inspired by the sonnets. So I kind of sense a communion with Shakespeare's work and life. And he was a great Europhile. He travelled in Italy. He went to Rome. We know because his signature's in the College of Rome. He was a crypto-Catholic, meaning a universalist thinker like me. And his father was a crypto-Catholic. They were from the ancient tradition of British intelligentsia who were Europhiles. And that's why his plays are so full of European allusions, Greek and Roman mythology, Celtic, Druidical mythology and King Lear, and Danish and Hamlet and so on. The man was an internationalist, and he would be appalled at the narrow-mindedness and pettiness of Brexit. The England of Shakespeare is for Remain, and also for solving the global problems such as global warming and climate change through applied intelligence and moral fervour. When it's time to act, you act, and you act with rhythmic attention to detail and gusto, and So what we need to do, for instance, firms like BP, these great energy giants, should be, in my opinion, retooling themselves. So they wean themselves off the carbon emission cycles. They explore hugely alternative fuels, above all hydrogen, and immediately transforming car fleets into hydrogen consuming, out of which the only residue is water, and cracking ways to mass produce hydrogen as a fuel, which can be sold in filling stations all over the world, in BP filling stations. And this would run the cars of tomorrow. It's already happening in many parts of the world, and BP should be, they should have a whole division working on alternative energy for the future. And then we can invest in that. Yeah, that's fine. Mark Rylance would say, yes, okay, that wing of BP we'll deal with. So, that's just a little observation on that. It's an interesting development. I just want to mention also that some people now, I've been working, and I've said it, I've been working on this commentary on the Quran for a long time. I started at the Castle of the Muses. It's a huge work. I think it's the most comprehensive and detailed commentary by an English speaker probably ever attempted. I'm using a number of translations. I'm going to the Arabic where it's appropriate. And I'm drawing on the whole history of other commentators and tafsir in both the Sunni and the Shia and the Ismaili and the Sufi traditions. My translation is coming from a slightly different perspective. I'm doing it from the basis of my concept of transpersonal history, which is something I designed during the time of my PhD. So I'm looking at the Quran through the lens of transpersonal history, by which I mean the study of the noetic history of mankind. So I'm looking at the Quran as a product of the spiritual genius of Muhammad and all the cultural, intellectual and spiritual and religious influences that have played upon him, and the noetic higher spheres of consciousness, let's call that the angelic world or the divine world. And I'm saying, yes, there's enough evidence from history that great human beings, great prophetic geniuses like Muhammad, or Lao Tzu, or Buddha, or Jesus, or Zoroaster, or Guru Nanak, or Deganoida, they can download, they can access that higher plane of consciousness, sometimes very clearly and like a lightning bolt, sometimes slightly opaquely, and it's less, there's more crackle on the transmission. And so what I'm doing in my commentary on the Quran is I'm trying to say, look, this is what this download probably seems to represent. This is when it happened, this is what the context was, and this is what, noetically speaking, this seems to be the thrust of that. Sometimes these transmissions are not, clearly communicated always, it seems to me. Some are, through the crackle, you can see. There's a struggling and a straining to kind of download the very highest insight. So it's a critical commentary. It's not a sort of a traditional commentary. It's a philosophical commentary from a particular angle of transpersonal history, which I think is ready for our era. In the 21st century, we need to look at these sacred texts, and all of them, not just the Quran, the Bible, the Vedas, all of them, through a common universal wisdom perspective, which is what I call transpersonal history. So it's marrying up Ken Wilber's ideas of the noetic evolution of mankind towards an integral state of being. It's marrying up Jung's ideas of the transpersonal nature of humanity. It's marrying up with Assagioli's ideas of psychosynthesis. And this notion that we're moving towards a new stage of consciousness, which Jean Gebser talked about, Aurobindo talked about, and Abraham Maslow talked about. These are the transpersonal pioneers of transpersonal psychology, which is a flourishing movement. I'm lifting transpersonal psychology out of pure psychology and putting it into history and saying we need to reframe our way of looking at history. And then that involves re-looking at these ancient texts and traditions like the Quran and seeing them in a totally new light. Do they stand up to scrutiny? Well, the thing is, yes, they do. The Quran is an incredible book. It's full of transpersonal insight, and I'd love everyone in the US and Iran to read my commentary, and I assure you they would then want to make peace with each other, because I'm drawing on both American and Iranian and cosmological sources. Okay, that's one thing I'm doing. And you can access that on my Global Green University website. I put all these files, these audio files, into the public domain. This isn't secret work I'm doing. I'm a public wisdom worker. And it's there, you can access it. You can listen to it at your heart's content. You can join the Green University as a registered student for a higher degree, and then it's free, or you can, you pay a small monthly subscription and you gain access, which just enables the site and stuff to keep running. So that's at globalgreenuniversity.com. Okay, another commentary I'm doing, and I want to flag up, is the commentary on the works of St. Paul and the New Testament. I finished the commentary on the 6 Gospels, that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Mary, Magdalene and Thomas. They're all on the Green University site, you can listen to them. That was a huge work. It's taken me many years of detailed scholarship, because I love those texts, and obviously it tells the story and works of Jesus and his disciples, and that again I've put through the lens of transpersonal history, and I've said, what is this about? What is this Jesus character doing? What is his downloadability? How does it rate with others? And it's a critical commentary, which explains, I think, in detail the inner heart of those Gospels and their messages. And by looking at the Gnostic tradition as well, I've managed to bring in all the kind of excluded wisdom aspects of Christianity, which the official church doesn't want you to know about or think about. And that's to its detriment, because the official church became a cumbersome beast, like a dinosaur of power politics. Very early on, actually, even soon after Constantine. And it started persecuting people that thought differently, Arians, Nestorians, there for the chop. And this was a catastrophe, which is why people had to hide the Gnostic writings. That's why in Egypt they hid them at Nag Hammadi. They were not discovered till 1948. It's 1945, sorry. It's a tragedy that the wisdom people were excluded from the very thing that Christ was trying to build, which was a wisdom church. And it lived on in bits. And Priscillian, the first guy who was ever convicted for heresy in Western Europe, who was executed, and even St. Martin of Tours tried to prevent it. He was, it turns out, sort of a Christian Druid figure like Pelagius. His heresy was he liked his followers to walk barefoot, and he worshipped, quote unquote, the sun, the nature. He was a Druid from Celtic Spain, Galicia. And so what I'm doing in my commentaries is trying to unpick all that and say, well, what was the truth behind the Christian story and the message, the actual one, and then what was it overlaid with, what lacquer process was done to obscure that, for what reasons and what politics. And I'm drawing on universal Christian sources, Protestant, Catholic, Gnostic, Orthodox, Druidical, and philosophical. So it's an eclectic process of commentary. And now I'm working through the letters of St. Paul, and I've just come up to the letter to Galatians, which is a classic text, and it's used often to say that this is the great text of Paul on freedom. But Paul himself had his limitations and his intellectual myopia, as all these sages and saints do. And so in Galatians, he has a whole rant against the children of Hagar, who are slave people, versus the people of Sarah, who are the free people, who are the ancestors of the Israelis and the Christians. They alone shall inherit the kingdom, which is the heavenly Jerusalem above, whereas the children of Hagar are the legalists, and they're just for the chop. Well, dear old Paul, that's not good enough, because those texts were used as a justification for white slavery against the blacks of Africa, when they were importing them to America to work the plantations. The whites would say, we're the descendants of Sarah, we're the real good Christians, they're the naughty black people, children of Hagar, and we can persecute them as much as we want, And this was a justification for slavery. it's typical of Paul's dualistic thinking. There's good and evil. I'm good, you're evil. I'm with the children of Sarah, you're with the nasty children of Hagar. The thing is, what Paul didn't realise is that a few hundred years after his death, this prophet would arise in Mecca who was from the children of Hagar. The Ishmaelites descended from Ishmael, the child of Abraham and Hagar, were the ancestors of the Quraysh and the ancestors of the people of Mecca, the Arabians. And the Israelites were often clashing with the Ishmaelites or the Arabs. And in Israeli thinking, they were the baddies, in Hebrew thinking. The children of Moab, they're the baddies, they're Hagar people. And it's interesting, the book of Ruth is a wonderful story about how those prejudices are overcome. Because Boaz, the Hebrew, marries Ruth, who's a Moabite woman. But, you know, each generation has to remember that the other is the beloved. And too often, unfortunately, we fall into this Pauline dualism where the other is the devil. And unfortunately, that text of Galatians, which I've gone through in my commentary, opens the way to dualistic persecution of the other. The Muslim, you know, the Crusaders are all yelling, well, let's kill the children of Hagar. No, let's make peace between the children of Hagar and the children of Sarah. And that's my job as running the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. You know, we need deep theological discussions because most Christians don't realise as they go to trot to church and sing their hymns and praise St. Paul as the greatest thinker after Christ who ever lived, actually how blind he was and how limited by the cultural context of his day, which was this black and white thinking. And, you know, he was a legalist himself, which is ironic because it's the very thing he rails and rants against. You know, I hate legalism, I stand for freedom, but I'm going to argue it legalistically. You know, so anyway, that's just a little glimpse of what I'm doing with my commentaries on St. Paul. Again, I'm putting them through the lens of transpersonal history. It's not, you know, a papering over the cracks, and it's not a sort of justificatory project when I'm looking at either the Quran or St. Paul. I'm looking at in depth, in detail, applying a scientific methodology, which is what transpersonal history is, and trying to argue not only what are the contexts, the cultural contexts, the memes, so to say, that they pick up on, but also what are the unconscious forces in the person himself, like St. Paul. What is he struggling with? Obviously guilt. He was a persecutor of Christians. He's now realised that was a horrendous thing to do. And he wants to make up for it by kind of flipping to the total opposite extreme. So it's a psychological commentary as well as a philosophical commentary. And then next and last, but not least, I want to say that I'm also doing a similar commentary on the writings of Karl Marx, because as a philosopher with a restless intellect who wants to do what he can to help world peace and advance a fraternity of nations and cultures on this planet, I'm looking at, therefore, at the Quran, which is the origin of the second biggest religion on the planet, Islam, 1 billion people. The origin of Christianity, which is looking at the New Testament, Paul, and that's 2 billion people on the planet. And I'm trying to point out the good and the bad at the root of them. And then I'm also looking at Marxism, because that was the most influential of all the secular humanistic philosophies of recent history. And it's fascinating and has had a huge impact on world history, whether you're for or against or whatever. Marxism is something that, we need to know about. So I'm doing what I don't think has ever been attempted. I mean, I don't know why. Where are all the Marxologists? I don't know. But nobody seems to have done a detailed commentary on Das Kapital. I've been looking for it. There isn't one. There are sort of Marxist texts written about some aspect of Marxist philosophy. There's Ishvan Metzaros, who was a professor at the University of Sussex, has written about alienation and Marxist thought, and Lukács wrote about history and class consciousness, and Ernst Bloch, a great Marxist philosopher, wrote about hope, in socialist thinking and Marxism. But I haven't found a detailed Marxological study of each, aspect of Marx's work. So I'm starting with Das Kapital, which is his biggest and most influential work. And I'm doing commentary on the most cogent and important of the passages. I'm not doing it because, with all due respect, Marx was a bit of a pedant, and he repeated and he went on and on and on. If he could say things in 100 pages instead of 10, he'd choose 100 pages. And a lot of that is padding. And so I'm trying to hone in. It's extracts of the crucial thing that I'm doing. And yeah, it's fascinating stuff. What I am putting in there, unlike Marxist commentators, because I'm putting this through the lens of transpersonal history. I'm not interpreting this according to orthodox Marxism, whatever that means. There was a time in the Soviet Union and China when to do a commentary on Das Kapital and to say the wrong thing would take me to the Gulag. I would be accused of being a heresy. I'm not interpreting it according to Lenin and Stalin and so on. Fortunately, those days have gone. I know many Russian philosophers, and I've met many Marxist intellectuals, and nowadays what I'm doing is possible. I won't be hauled off to the Gulag, fortunately, because all I'm doing is trying to find the truth. And what's very interesting, what it reveals and what I'm discovering, is that in Das Kapital there are many, many hints of deeper philosophical currents which Marx was swimming in. He's like somebody navigating a boat, one of those coracles, like the Irish used to use and still do. And he's got this little coracle called "I'm investigating capital and how it works and why it's having a bad effect on people." But all the time there's bubbling away other things about consciousness and humanity and identity and the polymath nature of human identity and how we're all interconnected. He's pointing towards almost transpersonal type observations, and occasionally little glimmers of Hegel get into the text, and I'm commenting on all that. And occasionally he's interested in esoteric thinking, because he was moving in circles that included, let's say, French esotericists. The French Revolution was an esoteric embarkation for a new world, and some of the greatest thinkers were in the shadows. People like Nicolas Bonville, who was a close friend of Thomas Paine and an advanced esotericist, druid, a magnificent intellectual. He stayed out of the revolution. He said, no, this isn't what we want. It's just a frustration by the poor because they're not getting what they actually want, which is the revolution of knowledge. What we really want is enlightenment, because that's what wealth buys. It buys access to knowledge and so on. Give the people knowledge, enlightenment, liberation of thought. That's the real revolution. That was Bonville's point. And that was Hegel's point as well, when he says that all education is about liberation. He was a crafty old fox, old Hegel, if you study him in detail, as I've done. And that's who really got Marx going, indirectly. Marx, again, I'm looking at it through what he says consciously and then what he sort of points to with his unconscious. He was a learned man, he had many different references, he throws them all in, Greek and Latin and so on. One thing he's very lacking on is his Hebrew and his knowledge of the Kabbalah, for instance, and Jewish mysticism. Doesn't seem to be there very much, and yet it's shaped his entire thought world. So again, I'm trying to do a transpersonal study of Marx and Das Kapital and look at it through the lens of transpersonal history. I think it's very interesting to work on this, and it's going to take me a year to finish probably. I don't seem to be able to choose small projects, but then the world is at a critical time in its history. So by trying to find the common language between Islam, Christianity, and Marxism and secular thought and science, what I'm trying to do is lay the foundations for a planetary civilization of peace in the future 1,000, 2,000 years. That's my work with transpersonal history. That's why I'm involved with things like the World Intellectual Forum. I'm trying to pave the way so that our future generations, which is going to be you and me in future incarnations, right? So we want to clean up this planet so we can come back and it can be all beautiful and we can spend most of the time, sitting under our fig trees and studying in the libraries and making love to each other as any proper human being should be doing. So that's the work, is to try and find the love essence within Islam, Christianity, and secularism, Marxism, and all the other religions, because I'm doing commentaries on Jewish thought, and I will be working on Buddhist and Zoroastrian and Jain and so on. I think I just want to say that the interfaith thing to finish with is therefore the essence of what I'm doing. It's more interphilosophical. And so the other thing I'm working on is this universal calendar of saints and sages, which is the first ever time any intellectual on this planet since Kant. Kant produced a sort of similar thing, which I discovered later after I'd finished my first volume. But his was much more restrictive and much more limited. What I've done is taken from all the traditions of mankind intellectually, all the ones that are listed on the periodic table. So that's the religious ones like Shintoism, Jainism, Sikhism, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Hinduism, new religious movements, but also esoteric movements like Freemasonry, Theosophy, Anthroposophy, Gallus Bailey teachings, some of the more Gnostic types of things, and all the Christian ones, which are the light blue, all the Buddhist ones, all the Jewish ones, of which there are many variants, Orthodox, Jewish, Conservative, Kabbalistic, etc. Using that as the template, I've then selected 365, one for each day of the year, from each of the main lineages. So I've got, really, in this one volume, the greatest thinkers, intellectuals, sages, and saints from all the traditions of all mankind. And I put them into one volume, so you can use it as a daily prayer practice. I do this every day, and some of my friends and students do. And I encourage all interfaith groups, if you're interested in spirituality at all, get a copy of this. Use it as your daily prayer practice. So when you come to the day, like today is the 23rd of June, you can then look up and see at a glance, who are the saints and sages that we celebrate today in each of the world's faith traditions. And every day there's great discoveries. It's exciting who you come up with. So Paul is coming up on the 30th of June. His day is coming up soon. And on the 29th, with Peter, in fact. So today is, as I said, is Etheldred in the Anglo-Saxon traditions. For philosophy today, we celebrate Charles Hartshorne, for instance, who was a great philosopher. He died in 2000, and he took Whitehead's idea of process philosophy, and he argued God is a verb, not a fixed static thing. So most religions talk of God, or the gods, they give them names, like Vishnu and Allah and Yahweh. Hartshorne said, what if we think of this as a verb? What if godding is what's going on here? And, the goddingness can take on any gender, male, female, or it can take on either singular or plural. So goddingness takes on many forms. And the actual essence of the heart of these God stories is the goddingness, the verb, which is more akin to why Christians say the Holy Spirit, the mysterious feminine presence in the Trinity, is the active thing behind the church, right? So I tend to be a Holy Spirit focused kind of person, as you probably gathered. And I've looked for the Holy Spirit in all the faiths, and it's there. If you do the work, I've spent 10 years on this work, this labour. And the Spirit has infused and inspired all the lineages. You can see it. And that's what Hegel was talking about, the universal spirit, the Geist. So yes, it's Charles Hartshorne, it's Emperor Jimmu, who was the grandson of Amaterasu and the founder of the Japanese people. Shinto, he's very, very important, the first emperor of Japan. It's Adam Weishaupt, who was the founder of the Illuminati, who was really just a philosopher like me, a polymath.